In order to explain the relationship of infrastructure and price, I'm going to give you a little story. It also illustrates a point about ease of use. About 30 years ago, I think it was, the fax machine was invented. I remember telling my staff at that time, what a stupid invention. Who is going to want to, I was doing research, I wasn't in commercialization at that point. Who would want to take something out of a computer, print it out, send it through a phone line, have it come out hard copy on the other side, have to re-enter it to stick it back into a computer? Why don't you just send it electronically? Obviously, what I had forgotten was that I was in a unique customer segment. Most people in the world were not on the internet, just as it was converting from ARPANET into the internet. I was in a very tiny minority, having a small business that was already on the internet. And thus, what was easy to use for me was not easy to use for other people, given the infrastructure in place. One reason they didn't have that infrastructure in place was the cost of acquiring it. When I got on the internet, I was in Port Townsend, Washington, out on the northeast tip of the Olympic Peninsula. We strung a line all the way from Seattle to Olympia, around through Tacoma, over to Olympia, and then back down along the land into Port Townsend, into our office. We had a dedicated landline. Very expensive. Worth it for us because we were leveraging it like crazy, but very, very expensive. Your average household, your average business was not going to do that. They didn't have the incentive, they didn't have the need to do that. So the fax made a lot of sense, because the fax was, you bought the equipment, you plugged it into in-place infrastructure, there was no added cost. For us, we had already incurred the cost. It was a sunk cost. For everybody else, if they were going to go on the internet, they had to buy the computer. A lot of people were still using typewriters back then. And then they had to also buy the internet connectivity and figure it all out, because it wasn't necessarily the easiest thing to figure out back then. It certainly wasn't intuitive prior to the period when there were actually internet nodes and people to help you figure it out. Vendors selling internet services. Is what I mean. There were nodes, obviously, but there weren't vendors in most places for them. So the point is this: when you think about the price of your technology, you can't only think about the price of the technology per se, but you must think about how it prices out given everything that's necessary to use it. If you're doing a camera rather, in the old days there was the price of film. Now there's the camera and the price of the memory card that goes in it so that you can store the pictures. Both of those go into the purchase price of the camera. Similarly, if you need special infrastructure to use the technology, typically the infrastructure is much more expensive, and that can be a killer on the price level for that technology. So always be aware, price isn't just your technology per se, but it's also your technology, the disposables, the consumables, all those kinds of things. And also, if you need new infrastructure to use it, it's the price of the infrastructure. And you need to take all of those into account when you think about, is price going to be a barrier to the adoption of this technology? Before we leave this area, a word about stickiness of end user needs. We've been talking about how you can use the infrastructure as sort of a constraint on the situation that the end user's in, a constraint upon the practices. And by understanding the constraints, we can begin to get a feeling for what kind of needs are feasible within those constraints and how those needs will operate. On a very new practice or a very new activity, we can't assume anything about the infrastructure. The very newness means the infrastructure may not be set. Let me give you an example from Eric von Hippel's book, Democratizing Innovation. In there he talks about windsurfing. Windsurfing took the old surfboard. Now we understand a surfboard. If you've seen an Elvis Presley surfing movie or a Frankie Avalon surfing movie, a Net Funicello, one of those, you've seen the people on the boards going like this on the waves, and they learn how to use the board on the wave. You stick a sail on top of it, all of a sudden it's not just playing the wave, it's playing the wind. Whole new set of problems. Which is to say that the solutions that existed in the past may not be appropriate anymore. And so for a while, until people sort of figure out how to deal with all of this, it's not clear what infrastructure, what kinds of technologies, the whole ball of wax, what's going to be done. We have a very loosey-goosey kind of situation. In those cases, it's harder to rely upon constraint analysis in order to get a handle on end user needs. And in fact, constraint analysis may be very misleading. What you really have to do is get out of your building, get out of your office, go and talk to people, go look at the situation, go try it yourself to get a handle on what's going on. And the other thing that's really important about very new situations, new practices, new activities is they may not be written up on the internet yet. It may be very hard to find information about them in terms of Frost and Sullivan hasn't done a report. You may find a website where people are talking about it, but it's this guy's opinion and that guy's opinion. There's nothing authoritative out there that you can rely upon. So be aware that the kind of stuff we're talking about works best where the market is more mature, it's at least in a growth phase, we know what the dominant designs are, so on and so forth. We'll talk about dominant designs soon. Just wanted to emphasize that there is a stickiness to needs information, just like there may be a stickiness to technical information or manufacturing information.